Mask of a Diva, a Stan Kraychik mystery, Book 4, 1994. Author, Grant Michaels. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York. Author, Eric Aust. For all the divas, operatic and otherwise. Chapter 25. Though I had spent the previous night with Daphne in the big house after the attack, all my clothes and other things were still in the cottage. I had moved everything to the big house because I intended to return to the cottage once Daphne felt comfortable being alone again. Honestly, I enjoyed the independence the cottage offered me, and despite the illusion of safety and numbers at the big house, I didn't really like the energy that lingered in Bruce David's room after his uncertain residency there. So when Daphne and the maestro and I got back to the estate that evening, I went to the cottage to wash and change for dinner. But I wasn't prepared for what awaited me. Maurizio was lying in my bed. I knew he was naked under the covers, yet there wasn't a single erg of sexual energy in the room. That was the first clue he was in trouble. I moved toward the bed and saw the sheets around his right shoulder stiff and maroon with dried blood. For an awful moment I imagined a reprise of Marcella Ostinata's death scene. But I was wrong. Maurizio was alive all right, but semi-conscious and moaning quietly. He was in serious trouble, burning with fever. His eyes looked at me. They were glassy and unfocused. The knife wound on his shoulder gaped at me, a deep cut running from the middle of his collarbone, diagonally through the pectoral muscle and across his upper arm. The gash was crusted and scabby, and it was oozing a bloody yellow slime. Portions of the sheets were still damp with the muck. Maurizio must have returned to the cottage after saving my life the previous night and had been there since, suffering a knife wound and harboring an infection. I telephoned the big house immediately and explained to Parker what had happened. I told him to call an ambulance and that I would wait in the cottage until it arrived. And for the next quarter hour or so, until the medics arrived, I cradled Maurizio in my arms, using the blankets like swaddling clothes. That's when I also noticed something on my nightstand that hadn't been there the last time I looked. A small folding silver frame displayed two photographs side by side. One, a dark-haired, dark-eyed infant in a billowy white christening gown, and the other, a curly-haired, impish boy of about 2 in a sailor's outfit. They were clearly the same person, and then I realized they were images, however distant, of the young man I held in my arms. I was about to fold the frame and place it in the drawer of the nightstand when Daphne arrived at the cottage. She saw me holding Maurizio and marveled for a moment at the queer picture we must have made. Then she noticed Maurizio's wound and quickly turned her head away. She said, "Did you know he was here?" "No, he must have come last night after chasing my attacker off. I guess they fought and he got hurt." "It looks badly infected," Daphne said. "He'll need antibiotics." Her gaze wandered to the silver-framed photos. I said, "Those weren't here before." I sounded defensive. "Maurizio must have put them there last night." Daphne said, "You don't have to explain, dear. We all have photographs of the people we love." But her remark reminded me that I never carried a photo of my man Rafik with me. Worse, I had always had one of Sugar Baby in my wallet instead. A tattered old snapshot, taken when she was a 5-week-old puffball. Even then, she had her magical powers. The medics arrived and got Maurizio onto a gurney, then wheeled him back up the path to the waiting ambulance. Daphne and I followed close behind. I wondered about the two of us going to the hospital too, but Daphne said that extra bodies in the emergency room would only be in the way. I agreed, although I did worry that Maurizio might come out of his delirium with no familiar face nearby. Daphne assured me that he'd be fine for the time being, and she'd drive us down to see him later, right after dinner. I still wanted to shower and change, but she insisted that we had little time to spare. "Besides," she added, "you'll enjoy your shower more after we're back from the hospital. Did you bring the photos?" "Which photos?" "The ones of Maurizio that were on the bedstand." "Why would I do that?" "You must," said Daphne. More than ever. Now that he is ailing, you really must keep his image close to you. It will help him get well, don't you see?" She smiled brightly. "Oh, to be young again, I'm afraid I'd been seen as a real quack the second time around, researching and proving the power of ESP to heal. So much for Harvard Medical School." Daphne sent me back to the cottage to get the photos while she continued on to the big house. When I got to the house, I found her in the library with the maestro. No cocktail in her hand that evening. She asked to see the photos immediately. As I handed her the silver frame, I asked why she was so interested in them. She answered, "I can't say exactly, except that there's something compelling about that young face. Something almost disturbingly familiar." "It's not as if you don't know him," I offered. "It's something else," said Daphne. "Something troubling." The maestro asked her to see the photos. He gazed on the pair of portraits for only a moment, then he blanched. "It cannot be," he said, shaking his head dismally. "It is not possible." Only an ominous timpani roll was lacking. "Chicasa?" said Daphne, as if the maestro's native tongue would encourage him to speak. He carefully folded the silver frame like a holy relic. Then he said, "I think this boy is the son of Marcella." "So?" said Daphne. "Huh?" said I. The maestro nodded. "I am sure now. I have seen these photographs before, many years ago. Marcella did have a son. He was this boy, but she did not keep him." "But how?" "When?" said Daphne. "And why?" The maestro's remarks had unsettled her as though they had agitated an old and dormant fear. He explained further. "Marcella had this son, but she did not marry the father. It was accepted for her to do this because she was a great artiste. But the infant was very sick, and after that he could not hear anything. He was sordomuto. Marcella cannot have a son who is like that, who does not hear her. It was a great shame for her. So she gives the baby to orfanatrofio." "Oh, dear God," said Daphne. "That explains why she left half her estate to that orphanage in Barry." "Yes," said the maestro. "I know about that, but Marcella made me promise I would never tell. Now, what does it matter? She is dead and the boy is here." "But who is the father?" said Daphne. "Ah," said the maestro. "The father was Americano, a businessman, married already. He could not marry Marcella, so instead he gave her much money." Oh dear," said Daphne. "I don't like what I'm thinking." The maestro said, "For many years I tried to find the boy, but he ran away and then no one could find him." "Until he showed up here," said Daphne, 2 years ago, right after Sid's death." Then she added, as if in a trance, "He gave me a card on which he had written, 'Ho tornato a casa.' How could I turn him away when he said, 'I've come home'?" For my part, a bit of mental arithmetic verified Lieutenant Branco's earlier report of Marcella Ostinata mysteriously leaving the opera stage for a single season about 25 years ago. My guess had been right. She had done so to have a baby. I said, "Do you think Maurizio knew that Marcella was his mother?" "How could he?" replied Daphne. I shrugged. "I've heard there's an immutable bond between mother and child that nothing can erase. Kind of like ESP. Daphne snapped at me. "Don't bandy my theories, young man." "I didn't mean to. I just wonder if Maurizio had some instinctive sense about her. She did abandon him after all. That may have left an imprint on his primal psyche." "An imprint," said Daphne, "like the Shroud of Turin?" "I see," said the maestro. "But I wonder," said Daphne. "I've known Maurizio for 2 years, and I never saw this frame or these photos." "Maybe they were his special secret," I said. "Imprint," she said, and pondered a moment longer. I wonder if this isn't the very thing that Marcella Ostinata had claimed was missing from her room that awful morning. I found her wearing my brooch. If Maurizio had seen this frame in her room, he would certainly have recognized himself in the photos. We all retained that imprint. He might very possibly have taken it from Madama's room for himself. But when? I said. How? Oh, he can climb anywhere, she said. Then Daphne snatched the frame from the maestro's hands, flipped it open, and scrutinized the photos inside. After many silent seconds, she said, I suppose I'm seeing exactly what I want to. I wish Maurizio was here right now so that I could study his face directly. I must make sure. Of what? I said. Daphne lapsed into a stream of consciousness about her second husband, Sid. How he had traveled a lot during those early years, especially overseas, where his company had won many contracts to set up state-of-the-art processing and freezing plants. He went to Italy many times, she said. Then her voice was almost suffocated when she recalled. And then my brooch disappeared, and now, looking at these photographs of Maurizio, I'm certain that those young eyes belong to none other than Sidney Bluestein. She paused a moment, then muttered, That snake! The maestro gasped. Grandio! They say things come in threes. What would be discovered next? That Maurizio had recognized Marcella Ostinata as his own mother, and then killed her to avenge the lifelong suffering that her cruel desertion had caused him? If the story of his birth was true, he was still half Italian, and such things happened all the time in opera. Maybe they happened in real families, too. On the bright side, said Pollyanna Kraychik, you and Maurizio have found each other and have become family. Daphne scowled at me. I love the boy dearly, but he is not my flesh and blood. Almost, I said unctuously. Almost not, said Daphne, after an extremely quick dinner during which Daphne ate nearly nothing and was brusque to everyone. She called the hospital to check on Maurizio. The report came back that his wounds had been cleaned, stitched, and dressed. He was on an antibiotic drip along with saline and glucose, and he was resting peacefully. Daphne hung up and said to me, Well, he may not be flesh and blood, but I'm going to see him. You're welcome to come along. I accepted without hesitation, for I hoped during the ride to the hospital that I might ease the friction that had crept between us. The maestro declined to join us because the next day's rehearsal would be difficult. It was the sixth probe, when the singers and the orchestra would work their way through the complete score for the first time together. In the hospital, Maurizio was sleeping quietly. His color had already returned a bit, and his long eyelashes drew me helplessly toward his face, as though I should kiss him. But I didn't. Instead, I forced myself to gaze in passively and wonder if it was possible that such a beautifully formed young man could sever the neck of the estranged mother in a fit of pique. But no answer came. On the ride home, Daphne told me that starting the next morning, a hired driver would be taking the maestro and me to the performance center. I'm afraid I've been overextending myself, she said, and with opening night only a week off, I expect all kinds of last-minute contingencies, and I've got to be sharp. You understand, don't you, dear? Of course, I said. In fact, I'd never quite understood why Daphne had insisted on driving us around in the first place. Whether out of hospitality or responsibility, her chauffeuring the maestro and me had seemed incongruous to her rank as benefactress of the opera festival, and giving Daphne's driving, it would be a relief to have a nice, taciturn, professional driver at the wheel. If you'd like, she said, I can rent a car for you so you can drive yourself. No, I said tentatively, I'll ride with the maestro. But then it occurred to me that a rented car would provide independence that no chauffeur-driven vehicle could. Besides, as Lieutenant Branco's deputy, I could use a set of wheels until I got my own cruiser. On second thought, I said, a rental car for the next week or so might be a good idea. In the amber glow of the Bentley's dashboard lights, I saw Daphne smile. I thought so too, she said. Tell me what you like, and I'll have it brought around tomorrow morning. My reply came out so fast it sounded as though I'd been waiting for that moment all along. Perhaps I'd been unconsciously. An Alpha, I said. A red convertible, said Daphne. Like my Bentley? Black, I said. Black goes better with my hair. Black it shall be then, said Daphne with a soothing cluck, like a mother hen who had found her long-lost chick. Correction, her second long-lost chick. She made all the arrangements as soon as we got back to the estate, and at her insistence I stayed again in the big house that night. I preferred the cottage to Bruce David's room, but I could hardly refuse Daphne's request after her easy generosity about the rented car. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.